Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. Today we have Michelle Johnston, who is an executive coach, professional, a management professor, and an author. Hello, Michelle. How are you today?
Hey, Mark. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being with me. Hopefully we'll have some fun and get into some depth about leadership and about your book and how what your role is as an executive coach and a management professor. So, Michelle, the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. What does a business mindset mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question, because for years, I teach in the business school. And when I think of business, I think of bottom line results. And I was a very action-oriented leader. I wanted to get to the bottom line, and I just wanted to get down to business. And what I've learned, and the reason why I wrote my book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership, is we're now in a whole new world of work and higher expectations when it comes to climate, culture, environment while you're working, however that looks. And so it's not all business. And so I've really had to adapt. And then I've done a lot of research and interviews to figure out how we all as leaders, as humans, can adapt so that it's not just all business all the time.
And you make an important point about culture. I think culture is changing within business. I spent 14 years in corporate before starting my own businesses, and I saw good and bad culture within companies. And I was at a company for 12 years. And seeing the change in those 12 years from quite traditional male-dominated partners and leaders into a lot more women becoming partners, a lot more culture being important and sort of nurturing individuals and understanding people are individuals across the board rather than just pockets of employees within departments or companies. What do you think that change has been over sort of this century for you that's been such a major shift? Is it millennials that have impacted that? Is it women as leaders becoming more? What do you think the biggest factors are?
I think everything you just said, yes, contributed to the seismic shift that we're all experiencing. And I've got to give credit to the millennials, Mark. I remember in maybe 2004, 2005, I launched an executive mentor program. And so my job was to recruit executives to work with our business students. And then I would, and so, we developed a structure and our goal back then was just to, so many of our students were majoring in business because their parents told them to, and they didn't really understand it or why. And so all we were trying to do back then is just pair up business people with these freshmen, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed students, just trying to orient them to the world of business and opportunities. And selfishly, in New Orleans, we wanted to keep these students because many of them were not from our area, and we wanted them to know that there were job opportunities in New Orleans. So anyhow, so we had two goals. So I would get together at the end of each year with these executives. Again, this was 2004, 2005, and they would say, "Oh my gosh, this new generation of workers is totally different. They actually want to have work-family balance, but it's called work." And there was so much pushback, and I was very amenable and agreeable. And how do you say? I could understand where my executives were coming from. I'm like, "You're right. Work is work. Play is play. You're not supposed to have fun. What do you mean they want to go to yoga? What are they thinking?" And so I got to give it to them. The millennials, I think, really started this and started making us really think about their questions of work-life balance. And clearly they saw their parents suffer. And even though my father had a great career with General Motors, we moved around every 2 years because back then corporate structure, corporate promotions were, if you were really good at your job, you're not supposed to manage those you were just working with peer to peer. You had to go to a new market. And so they moved us all over the country every 2 years. I was talking to my sweet dad last night, who's 77, Mark, and he still apologizes when he talks to me. "I am so sorry for moving you around so much." But the point was, back then, corporate America was the way it was. And you just said yes. And you said, "Yes, sir." And you said, "Whatever you say, I will do." And, he stayed with this one company his entire career. And those under that generation said, "I want something different." And there was a lot of resistance from the old school people like me, like, no, 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 no. Okay. So then you fast forward, then you have more women, like you said, in leadership positions, more diversity. And it all came to head during the pandemic. And it was wild. I just spoke to this fantastic woman yesterday, Jenny Blumenthal, who was a high level leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers and decided during the middle of the pandemic with her, I think, like a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old at home during lockdown. And she's running the entire hospitality business. And she couldn't do it all. And her husband was a surgeon. And she said, up until that point, we had it all. Like, I was like, yeah, I am doing this, right? She goes, I even felt guilty because she ended up quitting and writing a book about corporate rehab.
Right.
And really trying to create a new world of work that's better for all of us. And so that's where we are. But that's an example of somebody who in the middle of the pandemic just broke and said, I can't do this anymore. What would, I've got to, and I think so many forces came together, and I was just on a radio show the other day, and this was a really old school radio guy who's like, Michelle, I don't understand why culture is so important now. This is ridiculous. It's work. I mean, he was so old school, and I kept saying, I understand, but they're leaving. And if they're not leaving, they're not going to work for you. You're not going to hire and attract them. Yeah. And then if you do get them on board, they're disengaged, because that's why he brought me on the radio show, because 60% of at least Americans are disengaged at work. So what does that mean? Well, that means horrible things to your bottom line. A disengaged worker is not as productive, and you're not going to make as much money. So you have these old school people who are like, they're hanging on for dear life to this old mentality that work is work and you're not supposed to have a balanced life. And I said, well, what's the alternative? If we don't listen, what's the alternative? That's my question to you, right? What's the alternative?
Well, yeah, we could go in lots of different directions. Millennials, I do want to touch again on work-life balance. I I got told. So I actually worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers for 12 years. So,
Oh my goodness.
so in London. So yeah, I get it. I get it. I get the hours, the dedication, the travel.
Yes.
It was incessant. It was constant. I actually really enjoyed it. The culture actually, as I said, through those 12 years really developed, and they were quite progressive and diversity. It was a really progressive company. I wouldn't say that's in every country that PricewaterhouseCoopers are, but I can say in London and in UK it is a relatively progressive company. So I get what you're saying. Equally, I actually quit my corporate job. So I moved to KPMG for 2 years and then left mid-pandemic and did my own thing. It wasn't purely because of workload, but it was there was factors that meant that I could and I wanted to. So I did. So I left corporate world 2 and a bit years ago, and I've never looked back. I don't ever want to go back to that. So, and we'll come to work-life balance. It's important, I think, for a lot of people, and I want to know your view, whether it's actually realistic, but we'll come to that. But the question I wanted to talk to you, we've gone straight into work. We've gone straight into, as you said, but what I want to just bring us back to is a question that I sometimes ask is, tell me one thing in your upbringing that reflects who you are now.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
Ooh, that's good. So there's good and there's bad and there's ugly.
Okay.
And when it comes to being either a military brat or a corporate brat, right? Moving around so much. And so I went to 2 different 9th grades, a different 10th grade, a different 11th and 12th grade, all in different cities, all in different schools. So that's a lot. And you're constantly you're thrown in as the new person, trying to figure out new culture, new norms, new behaviors, and trying to be accepted. And at that age, trying to be liked, trying to fit in. So while I became really good at adapting and fitting in and making friends, I did not have a true grasp of me and my story because I was just constantly trying to fit in and adapt to other people's stories. Right. So that affected me. So I just kind of went along through life. And I remember when I joined Loyola as a very young, female, energetic, happy, positive faculty member at age 27, finishing my PhD, rather than saying, this is me, these are my strengths, this is what I'm bringing to the table, I am who I am, I looked around and tried to adapt to those around me, which was super old school. Academia is super old school. And so I spent years trying to be somebody I wasn't and suppressing my natural qualities, thinking there's no way I can be myself and be successful. So that's also what my book is about, the seismic shift in leadership. Is I learned that I was never going to be truly effective if I didn't own my journey and figure out my story and who I was and was comfortable in my own skin. So my whole thesis about this seismic shift is right now it's all about connection. So as I answered that first question, which you asked me, Mark, what does business mean to you? You know, it was all results all the time. I really wasn't worried about connecting with people. It was like, what do I need to do to accomplish my goals? And when I realized it was all about connection, there was a big reckoning. And I personally, because I was an executive coach, watching many, many leaders make the same mistakes I had made, trying to be successful by portraying or being somebody that they weren't. And when you do that, you are not connecting. And that was my big eureka, why I felt like I had to write the book. The seismic shift in leadership is that perfection equals disconnection. You can't truly connect with others if you're uncomfortable in your own skin and you're trying to be somebody you're not. So my upbringing of having to adapt ended up resulting in my really spending a whole, arrested development, delayed development, to whereas I just continued trying to be somebody else until I had to look in the mirror and say, whoa, all these executives that I'm coaching, not all, but I saw many of them get pushed out of organizations because they lacked connection with their people. And ultimately it was because they lacked connection with themselves. And that's when I had to look in the mirror and I said, it starts with you, Michelle Johnston. You better get a grasp of who you are, own it, and bring that to the table so that you can connect with others. I have to model the way. If you're, as any executive coach will tell you, right? I mean, none of us are perfect, but we better be pretty darn good at the stuff we're preaching, right?
How did you do that? How did you get that element of authenticity in your voice? And what was the process to get?
The book that changed my life as an executive coach was Brene Brown's book called The Gifts of Imperfection. And I remember reading The Gifts of Imperfection when she specifically talked about trying to adapt and fit in does not bring you a sense of belonging. And you're never going to truly be connected with yourself if all you're trying to do is adapt and fit into others. And what she discovered in her research is that we all want to belong. And Mark, and I apologize to your listeners for being this honest, but I burst into tears. I remember reading that, big crocodile tears, because I thought, oh my gosh, that's my problem. That was me. That was me. I didn't have a sense of myself because I was on this hamster wheel of trying to fit in with others. And that is when I said, okay. And she talked about owning your story, owning your journey. So immediately I started having my MBA students own their journeys the very first week of class. And so I made them the most vulnerable in a classroom with people they didn't know. And did it because I believed that it was a really powerful exercise. And as I'm watching all of my students own their story, own their journey, I'm watching their shoulders lift, their chins get higher, them becoming more confident in who they are because they went through this process, this exercise, they're saying it out loud. And I'm watching the class, and we would talk about it, how immediately they trusted these people. And I thought, okay, it's about darn time that I do the same and look in the mirror and own my journey and really understand what my strengths are. And so I just didn't think that I could be an effective professor by being super positive and energetic at 8 a.m. And I said, you know what? It's about darn time. And so I bounced into the classroom in the morning. I said, let me just tell you all, I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to be your coach. I'm not looking for your faults. I'm looking to build you up. And yes, I am authentic, and this is me. I'm positive. I'm energetic, but these are my gifts that I'm going to bring to the table. I finally owned it rather than, being shy about me as a person.
I think also if you're authentic with yourself and have self-reflection and being emotionally intelligent, you make connections deeper with people.
Yes.
That's what I've taken from what you've said, and from my own experience as well. You make, it's not always quicker, or it's not always as easy, but actually connecting with someone and sharing something with them, often you then are in that level where you have that deeper connection, and because I talk about in my businesses, I do real estate, I do a podcast business, and I talk about relationships being the most important thing in my business, in both businesses, because I'm in it for the long run. I want a 10, 15, 20 year, 30 year business and career. So I'm looking to make those deeper connections. Just being open to have those deeper connections, I think, is important as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so, I think this plays into what we're talking about, this new world of work. What I and all of us, I hope, experienced during the lockdown, as hard as it was, I think we finally saw each other as full humans, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we couldn't curate our lives. We couldn't just pop into the office, leave all of our personal baggage behind and say, okay, I'm now professional Michelle, and I will only show my people the best that I have. You know, we saw, I remember facilitating these big team meetings, and my daughter at the time talked me into getting a pandemic puppy, which I think like the entire world got.
Everyone did that, yeah.
And I remember thinking, what have I done? Because I had this puppy barking at me and nipping at my ankles as I'm trying to be a professional and facilitate these meetings. And finally I admitted, you know, on one of these calls, I said, y'all, I am so sorry. My daughter talked me into, and I lifted up my puppy, and they start clapping. They're like, way to go, Michelle. That's wonderful. I said, no, it's not. But they got to see this part of me that was real. Yeah. And I could, you know, and I think all of us, we got to meet husbands and children and animals and see inside each other's homes. And that's one of the elements that as we all go back to work, although I don't know if we're all going to go back to work full time to the office, you know, full time, I want us to still just bring our full humanity to work. That's my message and my mission right now is let's create these positive workspaces where it allows us to show up as a full human, and it allows us to see each other as full humans.
I think that's so important. I think that really is important. As you say, the kids, the dog, the husband.
This is life.
You had a window into people's actual lives rather than the 8, 10, 12 hours that you can just have this perfect face on while you're at work. And you trusted them more.
Yes, because we're all in this together. And that's another thing about owning your story. And whenever I work with teams, that's our exercise. We own our journeys. Yeah. And all of a sudden you do build trust and psychological safety when you know where that person came from. We just trust. And that's what we all need. We need to trust. None of us are perfect. And again, perfection equals disconnection. So give it up.
I'm going to take the conversation slightly differently. Something I wrote when I was reading about you and watching some videos and things that I saw you were on. And we've talked about the authenticity of people, but what do you think is more important for a leader now we're in February, just the 1st of February, 2023. Do you think empathy or decisiveness is more important for a leader?
Both, because here's what if I had to pick based on what I'm learning from the leaders I'm working with, what it takes right now to drive results is connection. So connection is what's driving results. Now, as a leader, do you have to be decisive? Yes. But first and foremost, you have to listen. It is a true shift in leadership rather than directing, commanding, controlling, one-way transactional communication. That's just not effective anymore. So for you to be able to drive the results you need to really embed time to show empathy, care, compassion for the human, for the full person that you're leading. So it is this shift much more towards servant leadership. Like, I am your leader. I'm going to articulate the vision, the strategic direction we're going in. I'm going to share with you the type of culture and environment I want for our team. And I'm going to hold you accountable. But most importantly, I'm here to develop you.
So, right. I understand that. And we're going to loop back to millennials, because millennials that are now in their 20s and early 30s, I think you're right, have driven that change, or are partly to that a reason for that change. And you're probably working with quite a few through your university experience. Do you think millennials taking up leadership roles like partners, CEOs, do you think are they going to shift the leadership even further towards that authenticity, empathy, emotional intelligence, trying to understand their people? Do you still see more for the shift from a leader even further towards those types of things, with the millennials taking up these sort of partner CEO roles?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to qualify a couple of things. My work with leaders on authenticity is really much more about so that they can become comfortable in their own skin. I'm not advocating for a work environment where it's all tell all, like oversharing and you as a leader, having to become everybody's therapist. No, 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 no. I'm still all about business and bottom line results. And we can do it in a way where we're collaborative, nice to each other. We assume positive intent. We want to be able to laugh and add some levity. So the type of culture that I envision is much more about a culture that is kind and that cares about you as a whole person versus this, we're just, I'm striving for this authenticity and I want everybody to show up and just share everything about their personal lives. I just want to make sure that's not what I'm advocating. The work with authentic connection with yourself is more for you as a leader to look in the mirror, take lots of assessments, grow, understand who you are, what your strengths are, what your blind spots are, so that you are comfortable with the gifts you bring to the table and the things you're not really good at. Surround yourself with people who are better. So if you're big picture, make sure you have somebody on your team who's highly detailed, right? I mean, all of these things, that's what the work is. So what I'm seeing now, because in my book, I talk about 3 levels of connection are necessary for leaders to be successful. And the 3 levels are the connection with yourself, which we're talking now about authenticity, getting comfortable in your own skin, owning your journey, and in order to truly connect with others. And then the highest level is that connection with the organization. So what I'm seeing more and more today, what leaders are struggling with is that connection with your team in this hybrid work environment. How do you really meaningfully connect when we're on, in virtual meetings every day? That's what leaders are struggling with the most.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think what I was finding, partly working through COVID in a corporate environment, the graduate schemes that people were on were the people that were struggling the most with connection, because that whole water cooler cup of coffee conversation with someone more experienced about something that you're facing at that time was really hard to manage in hybrid working, and 20-year-olds living in shared living and not really having a space to be able to work in their room or in a shared space. I think they were struggling the most within COVID times. Was that your experience as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I was out to dinner last night with a former educator. He just retired after 30 years of teaching high school math. And he said one of the most challenging things coming out of COVID, getting students back in the classroom, was their inability to concentrate and to focus. So they became almost more addicted to technology and their phones, and losing kind of the etiquette of what it means to be an engaged student. And so I spent a lot of time, I don't teach as much as I used to, but I spent a lot of time trying to, even on Zoom, saying, hey, you cannot be horizontal in bed. This is a class. This is a business class. I need you to treat this as an internship. And here's what I expect from you. I need you to sit up at a desk. I need you to have your camera on. And I need you to participate. And so there are these new norms. And I feel like some leaders, whether you're a professor or a leader of a team, they're not saying, for some reason, I need everybody to turn their camera on.
Yeah.
Because 92% of a message is nonverbal. So if you turn your camera off and nobody can see you or hear you, how effective are you communicating? Not very effective. We as humans assume the worst. So if somebody shows up in a team meeting, like one of my colleagues did the other day, and for 4 hours has a camera off and says nothing, what do we as humans assume? The worst.
Yeah. What do you think about the idea of having a 4-day work week?
Hey, if you can pull it off, I like it. I'm all about listening to your workers and your employees and trying to figure out what's going to work for them. My biggest client is a healthcare system. So they're really struggling because healthcare, you need to be at the hospital, you need to be there every day. But then some of the corporate functions are saying, yeah, but I don't have to. So I would much rather work from home. And then my leaders are struggling with equity. Well, how do I make those who chose a job in the hospital, they need to show up 5 days a week, but then others are choosing should the pay be the same? I mean, these are all questions we're trying to tackle right now because many people are choosing for more flexibility.
Yeah. I just think there's an issue with productivity. I don't think I get the argument that on a 5-day week, Friday afternoons might not be as productive as they can, but I just don't. I suppose it's more of so I'm 42. I've lived through the 21st century and seen work in the 21st century, and I don't think. And I know there was an argument that productivity was going to go down in COVID, and I don't think it has. I don't think it did do in hybrid working, but I just don't think that people will be as productive by cutting those hours, those 8 hours out of your day.
Well, what all of the research and the stats I've seen is productivity has not dropped, but what has dropped is happiness, and what has increased is loneliness. So this Harvard study just came out, that the longest study tracked since 1938, tracking, I think it's just Americans. I don't think it's global. I was just on a call with the author, Dr. Bob, of the study. Actually, no, it was global, because what he found was 300 million adults say that they're lonely and unhappy.
Right.
And so what we're finding, and that's global, because that radio show I was on, the host said, well, how many Americans do we have? Holy smokes. I said, we've got 340 Americans. That's a big number of people who are saying that they're unhappy and lonely. And so how he quantified that or defined that was, people are just feeling so disconnected from others. And one meaningful interaction a day can improve your well-being. Mm-hmm. So even though workers are saying, I want to work from home, we are seeing the same productivity, but well-being is going down.
Right. And that's one of the driving factors of work in the last 10 years, has been getting the wellness and the well-being right for people. So that's interesting that that's actually reducing. And just following on from that, there's a question that I was going to touch on earlier about work-life balance. Someone told me quite early on in my career, I was a little bit into my career because I had kids, I had young kids at the time, that work-life balance is only an aspiration. And it's only an aspiration because if you're working fully on your job and your role, your career, you will neglect your family. And that's just the way that, especially in corporate culture, but I suppose entrepreneurship is different, but there's similarities. But in a corporate career, you'll neglect your family if you're full on for a promotion for that next position. Where if you flip it and you get a better work-life balance and spend time with family, you're then going to neglect your work, and therefore you might not be able to achieve that promotion, that pay rise, whatever the next step for you is. So do you think, after teaching and executive coaching leaders, do you think work-life balance is something that's realistic, or is it just an aspiration that we should all sort of strive towards and agree we're never going to get?
Yeah. And I think this is what's really powerful about your podcast, is having this discussion of what that looks like and managing expectations. Do I think it's possible to have work-life balance? It depends what that means to each individual and at their life stage. So, my daughter just went to college, so I can literally work 7 days a week. She's not here. She's not in the bed. I don't have to feed her breakfast and pick her up at school, right? So I'm in a different stage of life. Now, working 7 days a week is not good for me. And I've got to figure out ways to disconnect and recharge to model the way for others. But somebody like I shared with you, the Jenny Blumenthal, who said she had a big awakening during the pandemic, trying to manage everything and realized she couldn't. So she decided to create a life. That's what I call it. It's a life that works best for her. So she exited corporate America and she now is her own consultant and adapting her schedule around the kids when they're at school. But then the afternoons she picks them up and she goes and takes them to their activities. She cooks dinner or somebody cooks dinner. They have dinner together and then she works a little bit after that. So why not figure out at where you are in your life stage with, if you have children, how young they are, well, what sort of life works best for you? That's what it's about. Yeah. Life stages and figuring it out on your own. So do I have balance now? Do I have a life that I love and that I find meaning and I don't even see it as work? Yes. I feel so blessed. And it sounds like you too, Mark, is you got to figure out what works best for you. And that's what we heard people all around the world were doing during the pandemic. Some of them were figuring out, I don't like the company that I work for. I don't like the boss that I work for. It makes me miserable. I'm out. Yeah. Right. And then it gave them an opportunity to figure out what does work best.
Yeah, I think it is. There has been a readjustment, and it'll be interesting in the next 10 years whether we'll find that companies are going to demand people to go back to the office 5 days a week, whether there'll be certain companies that will keep the hybrid model, and whether they will be more successful. I know a lot of banks in London are sort of putting pressure on their employees to be back in the office 5 days a week. I also know more progressive companies are saying, look, well, as long as you're in 2 or 3 days a week, or you're in on certain key dates that the whole team is in the office, you have to be in for that. I think it's going to be a really interesting, the legacy of the pandemic is going to be an interesting view on what's going to happen to business, to corporate America, globally corporate, and equally to entrepreneurs, how that's going to impact
entrepreneurs. I agree, Mark, are in a situation where I think they can make their own schedules. I hope that's what I'm thinking. And my prediction, I predict two things. Number one, I predict hybrid is here to stay. Okay. And number two, it's not even that I predict, I'm strongly advocating for leaders to then say, okay, I hear you, I'm listening. This, as long as the productivity is there, I'm good with you staying home on Mondays and Fridays or not coming in the office at all, but I need you in there once a month. Yeah. I need, or once a week. Yeah. We need to be together as a team. Let's have lunch. Let's go around, celebrate kind of wins, what's working. Let's collaborate. But I strongly encourage leaders to say, I hear you. I want to make this work for you. And we're going to need face-to-face time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. To be effective, there does need to be an element of face-to-face time. Just on the fact that it's interesting. Someone said to me a little while ago that the problem with Zoom's brilliant, and I love Zoom. I've used it before the pandemic, and then obviously through pandemic and all the other alternatives. But the one thing that you can't see is the rest of their body, and they could be someone sitting there as calm as you like, top half, and their leg is going like rafters, like just going and going and going. This simple body language that you get from face to face that you just miss on Zoom. And even to those bases, if you've got a leader or even a manager that's aware of those things and can sort of sense those things, there's a lot more benefit for people. So I totally agree. 100%, there does need to be face-to-face time, whatever that agreed, and every company is slightly different, every job role is slightly different. So I do think that's super important. So I think we'll I agree. I hope we have an element. And to be honest, I'm even, as an entrepreneur, I'm now making the effort to try and go into central London to have meetings and sort of build my day around networking or things like that, because I see the value of being able to go for a coffee with someone and look people in the eyes rather than just purely Zoom or Teams or whatever.
Boy, I agree with you. And I've been living on Zoom throughout the entire pandemic. I had not used it before the pandemic. Now all of a sudden I'm teaching and I'm doing my executive coaching. Just in the past couple of months,
Yeah.
I started meeting clients in person, and I had forgotten how much more powerful it can be. You do kind of forget. And I did have leaders tell me, some of the executives I was coaching through the pandemic, they would say, Michelle, my people are telling me that they're happy, but I'm watching them on Zoom and I can tell that they're almost like melting into their chairs, holding on for dear life, going, no, don't make me come in. Don't make me come in. I'm really happy. But they're like, Michelle, they're not, I swear, but they don't see it. They can't. I think it's just this transition we're in. And again, I'm not saying you've got to come into the office. That's for every, individual boss to figure out. But we do need, and it's going to come at an expense. And I recognize that. I was on a client call yesterday, and he heads up a big division. And for the very first time since the pandemic, they are meeting where are they meeting? In Santa Cruz, California. And that's expensive to fly everybody in, but it's necessary. So the cost that they're saving on real estate because they hired this workforce that lives all over the place, right? That's fine. But you better invest and know that it's going to be costly, but so important to bring people together face to face.
It's going to, if you don't do that, I think you'll end up with lots of more sick days and things like that. People, or not being motivated, not being productive. I 100% agree. I'm glad we're on that, because I bang that drum quite a lot. And I think there's lots of advantages to hybrid working, but we also need to realize there are some negatives about it as well. So, I think that's really important. Why is New Orleans so dear to your heart?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, Mark, because I've actually been thinking about it recently. We're about to be in the throes of Mardi Gras. Right. And look, I chose New Orleans as my city without any family when I chose it as a grown adult, knowing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I chose it because of how it made me feel. I had moved around so much. And when I went to New Orleans, there was just this joie de vivre, this individuality, music on every corner, this soul that I hadn't experienced in other cities. So that's what got me there. What has kept me, and I'm not in New Orleans right now, I'm actually on the East Coast. But what's kept me in New Orleans is the true ability to connect. And I dedicated my book to the city of New Orleans, where you don't have to be perfect. It is a city that is steeped in all of these rituals and traditions that bring people together. So I mentioned Mardi Gras. I live 5 blocks from the parade route. Wow. So there's going to be, as soon as I fly back next week, every single night almost, there's going to be a parade going by 5 blocks from my house that brings all of my neighbors together, this entire community together with laughter, levity, this commonality. And that's just one of our many traditions. And then after Mardi Gras is over, then we've got French Quarter Fest and Jazz Fest. We have all of these rituals embedded into the rhythm of the city that are about music and things other than work. So we're a city that is not just all about work. We're a city of true individuality. So that's what has kept me there. I think New Orleans does connection better than most cities I've seen.
That's very interesting. What is the plan for the next 2 to 5 years for Michelle?
Yeah, so great question, Mark. You're really a really fantastic host. Thank you again for having me. So my plan for the next 2 years, I've already spoken to a publisher about writing my second book, and I got excited on the call because I wanted to be the seismic shift in culture. So my first book was the seismic shift in leadership and how leadership needs to change. And now it's about culture, a little bit more of a macro perspective. And that excited me on the call. And then I got off the call and I said, you know what? It hasn't even been a year since I published my first book. book and it became a global Amazon bestseller. I'm so grateful. And it's much more about the book now. It's a mission. And I truly feel like I'm on a mission to help all of us wherever we are. You're in London, I'm in New Orleans. There could be listeners from the other side of the planet. My mission is to help create positive workplaces and to get rid of jerk bosses. And sometimes it takes rehab, and I'm happy to help. That's my profession, right? As an executive coach, if you thought that the way to be effective was all about command, control, micromanagement, and not really showing that you care about your people, maybe that did work for you for a while, but I will help you because it's not going to work for you anymore. It's a whole new world of work out there. And I think that it can all be kinder and it can be a more pleasant environment for all of us. So that's my mission. So for the next 2 years, I really want to continue that mission. I want to help leaders. I want to help organizations because this is our opportunity. If not now, then when, Mark? We have a seismic shift happening. So let's listen. And let's reinvent, let's reimagine what meetings look like. Let's reimagine what workspaces feel like. This is our time.
And all these things like VR and AR and using technology, AI to blockchain, these are all things that are right either with us. And I was talking to someone about AI recently, and he was talking about Mid-Journey and Chat GPT, the sort of role of AI being able to write you essays or blogs, and the Mid-Journey, which is all about AI creating unique artwork, which is you should check it out. All of my listeners should check out both of them because they're just both incredible. But he was saying that AI has been in the background in certain industries, and it's been enabling us to progress and be productive. Where in this new era that's coming through now, Web3, is that AI is going to be a lot more in the forefront of being able to do, as like Chat GPT has been all over the internet and everyone's talking about it and the role that it can play. So I do think things like technology, that whole idea of being able to reimagine the workplace, what it means to be in a workplace as an entrepreneur, holding meetings, I think it's just going to be a fascinating place to watch, to see how leaders and equally management and equally employees get to reimagine what the workspace looks like.
Exactly. Well said.
Thank you. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quickfire questions. They don't need a quickfire answer. They're a little bit thought-provoking, so beware. The first question is, what was the best decision that you've made?
Oh, man, Mark. Oh, my goodness. Because it's interesting. My brain immediately went to personal decisions. I remember trying to figure out and going to my boss at Loyola going, can I be a professor and get tenure and still have a baby at the same time? I don't see it happening. And she said, if you want to have a kid because there's no perfect time. And so that's the best decision I ever made is to have a baby, no matter how I thought this is not going to be good for my career. And again, that was way back when I kind of pretended like I wasn't pregnant and we didn't really have maternity leave. And I had to do it in a way that I wouldn't want anybody to think that I wasn't still, pulling my weight at my job. That's another thing that I'm hoping workplaces are a little bit more accommodating. And I hope that they've improved, because it's not just the woman having a baby, the husband and the family. That's a whole nother topic. So the best decision I ever made was having my baby girl, Elizabeth.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
What I just shared with you, when I went to my boss, I said, oh gosh, when is the perfect time? I need to have, because again, I was kind of obsessed with perfection back then. And thankfully I've given that up. When is the perfect time to have a kid? I read every single book and she said, there's no perfect time. And if that's what you want, then figure it out.
Right. Great stuff. Who's helped you most in your career?
Oh, Marshall Goldsmith. So Marshall Goldsmith is the #1 executive coach in the world. And when I was in my tenure track position, I'd had my daughter and I had my head down trying to publish, or else I knew I would perish. And it was, pretty intense and a lot of pressure. And I remember reading in 2001 an article in the New Yorker magazine that profiled this executive coach named Marshall Goldsmith. And he was going around the world kind of rehabbing jerk bosses. And he had a methodology, stakeholder centered coaching. And I just loved everything in this article. I ripped it out. I put it in my filing cabinet. And I said, one day, once I get tenure, I'm going to lift my head up and I'm going to be an executive coach. And so I did. And I pulled the article out. I followed his methodology. And it wasn't until years later when he turned 70, I was in one of his audiences. And he had just written the book Triggers, and I was with a bunch of my leaders that I coached, and we were there to see him talk. And he said, I've turned 70 and now I want to give back. So if anybody wants to be mentored by me, send me an email. So I did. He is my official mentor. I'm in his group called 100 Coaches of the world's top coaches. And it's the best thing that's ever happened to me professionally.
Oh, amazing. What a story. You met your hero and it was a good experience. That doesn't happen for everyone, unfortunately. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Tell me about a regret that you've got.
A regret is me trying in the beginning to be somebody I wasn't. And a regret is not believing that I really could be me and succeed. So it took me a little bit longer than I wished it had to understand I really could be me and be successful.
Okay, fair enough. This next question, you're not allowed to say your daughter. Okay. What are you most proud of?
I'm not allowed to say my
You're not allowed to say your daughter because I know you're going to say that.
Okay, so yeah, besides my one and only baby girl Elizabeth, who is at college, no longer a baby, is the book, because that was like giving birth to a baby. And it was scary as heck, because all of a sudden I had lived pretty much my whole life, I felt, under the radar. And all of a sudden I could no longer be under the radar. And I was out in the world with this book. And it's been, and it was scary, but also the best thing, what I'm most proud of.
Hey everyone, I'm sorry we're going to have to stop the podcast interview there. Unfortunately, Michelle had some internet connection issues and we weren't able to finish that interview. They were the quickfire questions. They were definitely coming to the end of the conversation. So I'm not going to go any further detail in there, but just to say thank you very much for listening to the podcast and on YouTube. I really, really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Sorry we got off cut so short in such a weird way. But as I say, she had some internet issues. So look, thank you very much. And hopefully I will see you and you will hear from me soon in the next podcast.